feel like it. Four horsemen. I wonder which one I am. The one in the front or the one in the back? Yeah, I'll do that. I'll do it. You just leave it, please. Yeah, sorry, a few technical things. I've decided to, with the kind permission of Graham and Walter, to be first, mainly because I'm very jet-lagged. I'm still living on Cairo time, 9 hours ahead of you. And so it's kind of like midnight for me here. I've had dinner this morning. So you'll bear with me if I seek some dates and slur and look desperately at Graham to sort of cue me in. In 1993, a rather unusual event took place. To be more precise, it took place at 11:05 on the 22nd of March, 1993. There was a man called Rudolf Gantenbrink who was inside the Queen's chamber, and he was about to explore one of the... Just don't do anything, I'll do it. Wait, I'll do it. What's happening? Sorry. Yeah. There we go. Sorry, Alan. Go on. Voila. Yeah, where was I? Breakfast. 1993. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, he was about to put a miniature little robot that he had manufactured himself to explore the southern shaft of the Queen's chamber. He was beginning a journey, as he called it, into the unknown. Nobody had ever been up there. In fact, nobody could. It's a very narrow shaft. It's about 8 inches by 8 inches in opening. And we had no idea where it went and what would be inside it. He took about 3 hours to get the robot to the final, to the end of the shaft, about 60 meters deep into the core of the pyramid. And he was filming. And what he saw was what looked like a little door, a tiny door with 2 handles. We still don't know what they're made of. Probably made of copper. And of course, it was an extremely exciting find. We still don't know what's behind the door, so don't ask me what's behind the door. But the reason I'm bringing this up is that we still don't know, after 14 years since the discovery has been made. When he finally announced this, we announced this in the newspapers, and it went berserk. It was routed around the world, and everybody wanted to know what's behind the door and what does it mean and so forth. The trouble with the Egyptologists is that they didn't know what to call this thing. And they got very, very upset when we called it a door. So we put door in between inverted commas. They didn't like that. So somebody came up with a portcullis. I know, don't ask me what a portcullis is exactly, but it's some sort of sliding door. They didn't like portcullis. Said, We don't know if it's portcullis, and you can't say it's a portcullis. So we said it's a slab with copper handles. No, we don't like slab with copper handles because we're not sure if it's a slab with copper handles. So after a few weeks of discussing how we're going to call this thing, Rudolf came up with a good one. He called it the thing. That's a problem with some of the academic. It's really a bizarre thing, is that we waste weeks, months, and in this case years, to define something which obviously looks like a door. I don't mind calling it a door, a little door if you like. It's a little door. But it's to typify the kind of problems that outside researchers have when they topple the apple cart, when they do something that is not within the confines of the academic established views. They're working outside the box. And Graham and myself have been doing this for years, and we know a lot about this problem. It very much depends what you want to do with your discoveries or your ideas. What I want to do is to change Egyptology. And I'm very convinced, and more so that we have two serious problems with our knowledge of ancient Egypt. One is that we are almost certainly dealing with a much, much older culture. We have an older pedigree on this planet, which is very important for us to know, because we really need to know how old we are and what happened. The other is that there is a great misunderstanding on what were the tenets of this amazing civilization, this pharaonic civilization. It's been reduced to a boring culture, obsessed with death and going to build monuments just for the sake of putting blocks one on top of the other to put a pharaoh in. It doesn't fit what we see. We're dealing, I am very sure, with a much more spiritual culture, one that literally believed that you could connect earth and sky, and not in a hocus-pocus way. Because after all, we are from the sky. I love the phrase that Carl Sagan used, saying we are star stuff, because we are indeed star stuff. Some star in some very, very distant time blew up, and its leftovers is us. We are conscious star. We're conscious star stuff. And for all we know, we will return to this stellar origin. So, thinking of us as being, having a channel, a sort of link, a connection with the sky is not sort of superstitious nonsense. By thinking in a different way, we think in a cosmic way. We have a lot of problems on this planet. And a lot of problems because we think very much on a, not just on an earthbound level, but in a form that is totally alien to the universe. We have countries and borders and social systems and religious orders and all this variety has caused us endless problems throughout history. It would be a wonderful thing if we could all think of ourselves as being part of a cosmic environment. We are cosmic men and women. We live in a cosmic environment. We tend to forget this. 50% of our environment is down here, and the rest is up there. And boy, is it the rest mind-boggling. We're a little planet floating 2/3 down a galaxy near a sun, near a star, with unimaginable numbers of stars and galaxies, 400 billion stars within our own galaxy, 10 billion galaxies estimated. And now we're talking about infinite number of galaxies. We belong to all this. And we have to think in those terms. Because when we do think in those terms, we shed away, discard the smallness of our way of looking at the world, the way of looking at this planet. This planet is part of a family of other planets, and our solar system is part of a family of other solar systems. And our galaxy is part of a family of other galaxies. And we belong to this amazing, gigantic, absolutely mind-boggling environment. If we could all think like that, I'm pretty sure that we will gradually avoid all the conflicts we have. There wouldn't be any, since we're all thinking the same way, looking at ourselves in the same manner. And asking the three fundamental questions which Walter raised. Today, as it was in 10,000 years, as it was in 20,000 years, and as it will be in maybe in 10,000 years, we have the fundamental questions of our existence. Where do we come from? What are we doing here? Apart from, I know what I'm doing here, I'm giving you a talk, I think. But what am I really here for? And where are we going? What is our human destiny? What is our goal? What should we do on this planet to fulfill a mission that this planet has? And the same questions applied 10,000 years ago. What's interesting about the Egyptian civilization compared to us today is that we, or few of us, ask ourselves these questions. We put them away. We don't want to be bothered with these fundamental questions. And we go about our lives watching TV and doing whatever we do. But the more we put them off, the more we lose touch with our spiritual world, with our existence, with the possibility of knowing who we really are. Well, the Egyptians did not put them away. They thought about this almost perpetually. Their whole culture was to understand where they came from. And they came up with some answers, which to us appear to be superstitious ideologies. And yet, they were so convinced that they had touched some of the answers that they left us this legacy of monuments that surely should inspire us to look more carefully, because the motive of building what they did, massive, absolutely gigantic structures. I live in Egypt now. I was born in Egypt, and my wife and I have settled back in Cairo. We literally live opposite the Great Pyramid. And as we have breakfast every morning, looking at this monument, it looms like a massive, gigantic question mark. It seems to beg, find out, why am I here? I could be part of the answer. What drove an apparently primitive society with no tools, with no iron, not even with a wheel? The wheel hadn't been invented yet. No pulleys, just sticks and ropes and sheer human muscle to raise a monument, and they raised many, but the Great Pyramid alone is 146 meters in height. It was the highest, tallest, most massive structure on this planet, till you guys went ahead and built the Empire State Building and spoiled it for us. Still, even compared to the Empire State Building, the mass that this pyramid contained is 1,000 times more than the Empire State Building. It contains 2.5 million blocks of stone weighing an average of about 3 to 4 tons. We're talking about 6 to 8 million tons of material being quarried, hauled, dragged, and put in a pyramidal shape. And more annoyingly, more baffling, not just in a pyramidal shape, but in a monument that has the precision of a Swiss clock. It is aligned within 3 arc minutes of precision. It is a dart. It's taking a dart, and I have a board on the other side of this hole, and blindfold, I'm going to hit the bullseye. That's how accurate it is. With no optical instruments, no theodolites. It is baffling. What it should tell us is that not only the scale of this monument, but the sheer precision, the dedication to have it so precise, must have a meaning. You just don't do that with no clear purpose. And I would add that you just don't do that to build a tomb for a pharaoh. It just doesn't wash. This monument is aligned to the stars. It is aligned to at least 4 constellations with an accuracy that is stunning. And as if this wasn't enough, it forms part of a scheme that represents a constellation pattern on the ground. This ain't a tomb. It did serve what we would loosely call a funerary ritual. But the idea of a funeral, or a tomb in fact, was totally alien to the Egyptians. Incidentally, we tend to speak of Egyptian religion, Egyptian tombs. This is what we mostly talk of. An Egyptian funeral. Well, these words do not exist in the ancient Egyptian language. There is no such thing as the word religion. Although we have books about Egyptian religions galore. But the word does not exist, honest. The nearest thing that they had was the word haiki, which means magic. But I'd like to call it a magical religion. Or if you like, a religion that involves the magic of nature. A religion that is integrated to the mysteries of nature. That's what they had. And as far as funeral, nope. Their idea of what happened after death was a journey into the cosmic world. And these monuments are the launching pad, the gateway to the stars. And they truly believed that they could achieve that destiny. This is very interesting. Is it possible? They believed that a human being could release his spirit through rituals in a context. And the context is the pyramids, later the temples. And when that spirit was released, be directed and equipped to undertake a journey towards the cosmic destiny. After all, this is what we're all hoping we could do. Well, they seem to have thought that they knew how to do it. It could be hocus pocus. On the other hand, maybe they did know. I've just done a documentary, some of you may have seen it on History Channel a few days ago. And if you did, you would have seen a gentleman called Archie Roy, Professor Archie Roy of Glasgow University. And he says 2 things which I find very interesting. He says 2,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, there were Einsteins and Newtons. No reason at all why we didn't have big brains of the caliber of these geniuses. The only difference is that they didn't have the science and technology that we have today. And therefore their genius was directed elsewhere, was directed into spiritual and religious thinking. And rather than look for the answers outside, they seeked inside. They internalized their search. All their genius was focused into finding the answers within. And they seem to have achieved it. We hold the answers of these three fundamental questions inside us. Inside us is the knowledge of where we come from and what we're supposed to do here and where we're going. But not only we're not asking, we're definitely not even trying to get the answers. And I'm advocating a revival in this form of thinking. We have been subjugated to scientific thinking for 400 years, since the scientific revolution. It's been wonderful things. We have mobile phones, we have TVs, we have digital television, but we do not have the answers. Worse, like I said, we've stopped asking. We need to think differently. It's about time we wake up and say, let's think differently. Let's search elsewhere. This mad rush of scientific and technological advancement is giving us a lot of things, but it's alienating us from our internal selves. We are totally focused and obsessed with external things. It's about time we look inside. And I'm sure, I hope, my great friend Graham Hancock is going to talk about that side of it. I'm not the spiritual guy in these matters, but I'm the nuts and bolts and alignment guy. So let's get on with my alignments. I want to speak to you, before I run out of time. I'm ad hocing this, by the way. I always do that. About my new work. I'm actually writing a book at the moment, which is 60% complete. It's called Sirius Rising. Sirius in the sense of Sirius the star. And it is about to demonstrate that what we have long suspected, ancient Egypt is much more ancient than accepted. But before we were working with theories, Hancock and I wrote a book called The Message of the Sphinx, which argues with two sciences, the science that has been used by Robert Schoch and John West, the science of geology, and the science of astronomy, which Graham and I put into motion in this book. And both sciences point to an older Sphinx. I'm not so sure how old, and I'm certainly going to disappoint John and perhaps, because I believe that we have to stick, when you're dealing with matters like this, you have to stick to the evidence whether you like it or not. You have to stick to it. Whether not only you like it or not, whether you're wrong or not. The pyramids, in at least as the conventional chronology and dating, and at least as far as the astronomy is concerned, is well bracketed in the 3rd millennium BC. The Sphinx is another matter because we have geology here. Astronomy cannot show whether a building is older. It can only say that it spells an older date. Geology can, but geology is not so precise. Nonetheless, the two sciences combined have suggested that the Sphinx could be much older. So we've got a curious situation here. We have a monument next to 3 large pyramids, which are bracketed, like I said, at about 2500 BC. And yet this could be thousands of years older. This led us to suspect that when we analyzed further the astronomy of the Giza necropolis, what came up was a surprising date. although the date of 2500 BC, 30 minutes left, my God. Okay, I'll have to speed up. We arrived at the date for the necropolis of 2500 BC, which is a conventional date. It appears in the alignments of the shafts of the Great Pyramid. But the disposition of the three pyramids on the ground, if one accepts them to be correlated to the three stars of Orion's belt, as I've been saying for the last 20 years or so, gives us another date. Gives us a date of about 7,500 BC or so. What is interesting about this date is that when one combines the Sphinx to this scheme of stellar alignment, the Sphinx also provides that same date if one understands what it is correlated to in the sky, which is the constellation of Leo. So we have an odd situation here where the necropolis built, or at least the pyramids built in the 3rd millennium, are speaking or are sending a message of a time which is 8,000 or 9,000 years before. How is that possible? As a quick analogy, some of you may have been to Europe, and you have to be in Europe at least to see older monuments than the Empire State Building. And you've seen or heard of our famous cathedrals in France and in England, all dating about the 13th century BC, the first ones, AD. I'm very much BC these days. 13th century of our era. Now, if you examine them from a purely open, unbiased point of view, knowing nothing about them, and you arrive at a conclusion that they were built in the 13th century, you're right. Whereas if you conclude that what they represent is from the 13th century, you're wrong. We know what they represent. They represent the time of Jesus, which occurred 13 centuries before. This is what the pyramids do. They represent a different time, a different golden age. They're a memorial to an ancient time. Except because they use astronomy to align them, we can date that time. Whereas with the cathedrals, what do? Well, if you know nothing about them, you look at the statuary in there and the iconography, and you arrive at the conclusion that they seem to be indicating some place in the Middle East around the beginning of our era. That's how you would sort of approach them. And then you may find some inscriptions speaking of Jerusalem and the land of Judea, and then you would more or less come to a conclusion that they fit that period. But if we had astronomy, if there were astronomical lines, we could come to a spot-on date, which we do with the pyramids. However, it's a problem, because the date of 11,000 BC or so is way, way, way from the date that is established as the beginning of Egyptian civilization. As far as Egyptology is concerned, Egyptian civilization begins in the year 3000 BC. Before that is prehistory. Whereas we're saying, that the Egyptians are saying, that it is much older. Oddly enough, we have many other cultures saying the same thing. We have the Greeks who were in Egypt who kept insisting that the Egyptians had told them, and they were aware that Egyptian civilization is far older than the established views. Indeed, Egyptology itself changed its mind several times. Had you been living in the 1930s, Egypt was about 6,000 years old, according to established views. They changed that to about 3000 BC because, I'm not sure why, because it just made them feel better. If you were born a century ago, the world was 4,000 years old. No, sorry, it was created in the year 4127 BC. Accepted by every scientist. In fact, when Darwin suggested otherwise, he was pillared badly We got the date wrong as far as ancient Egypt. What does it mean to us? So who cares if it's much older? Is it going to change our TV programs? Or no. What it will change is the way we see ourselves. We need to know where we come from. We need to know who started all this. I think we've got the place now. I'll have to rush here. I'm going to talk about a new site that some of you may or may not have heard. It's called the Nabta Playa. Nabta Playa. Let me explain. Visualize Egypt 20,000 years ago, 30,000 years ago. It was a very different place than it is today. I'm going to carry on talking rather than showing you slides. I think it's coming across well, isn't it? Oh. Let's do it different. I'll show you a few slides in a minute. "30,000 years ago, very hostile place. It was a kind of marshland, very difficult to live in, sweaty, dangerous, crocodiles, insects. Nobody wanted to go there. In fact, we think there was hardly anybody there. Maybe a few hunter-gatherers and a few primitive fishermen roaming the land. Where it was all happening was not in Egypt at all, it was nearby, in what we call today the Sahara. The Sahara was a very, very different place in those epochs. It was fertile, it was hospitable, lovely lakes, grazed land, animals had been domesticated, far, far ahead of what was happening elsewhere. Sometime around the 12th or 13th millennium BC, our planet jerked a bit, caused the Ice Age to break. The huge slabs of ice in the north melted slowly. And in the south, in Central Africa, super giant monsoons began to explode. Torrential rain non-stop, causing lakes to form, lakes to overflow and carve rivers, one of them the Nile, making its way all the way to the Mediterranean. Still a very inhospitable land, although this primitive river breaking in through these marshlands. Elsewhere, the monsoon rays fell on the Sahara. And around 15 to 12,000 BC, lakes were formed, but temporary lakes. You can imagine this enormous area with lakes like archipelagos in an ocean. And the survival of the people now in this area depended very much on knowing when these lakes would fill, when they would empty. They would last for about 7 to 8 months. They would fill at the beginning of the monsoon, which was around midsummer. And by midwinter, they would begin to dry up. And by early spring, there was no more water. When one tribe moved from the area that they were based and were heading for a lake, they had to be damn sure that that dry lake was going to be full of water. Otherwise, they reached there and they would die. Their whole existence depended on knowing precisely when these lakes would fill, and they moved from lake to lake. One of them happens to be 100 kilometers west of Abu Simbel. Abu Simbel is the furthest point south in Egypt, today on Lake Nasser, where the great temple of Ramses II is, the Colossi, I'm sure you've seen pictures of it. 100 kilometers away, a stone throw away from the Nile Valley. And we know that nomads who had domesticated cattle as early as 15,000 years ago went to this lake We call it today the Nabta Playa. The name was given to it by an American scientist, with whom I shall speak very briefly in a moment. So they went to this lake, and they stayed during the monsoon season, at the beginning of the monsoon season, and they would stay from about June to February. And when the lake dried, they moved away and went to find somewhere else. And they would do this for years, for centuries, and for millennia. We have evidence that these people, whoever they were, had been coming to this lake for thousands of years. Finally, they found a way to stay there. They wised up and realized that if they dug wells, they could use the water of the wells during the dry season and survive till the monsoons came again, which is a wonderful thing because it gave them time. It gave them time rather than just survive and move from lake to lake. It gave them time to look at the sky. And they had thousands of years in this absolutely crystal clear environment to look at the sky and realize that by looking at these cycles of stars and the sun and the moon, they could time their monsoons. They could even navigate from one lake to the other, like ships do. We call them the cattle people. I started calling them the star people. Why? At about 3000 BC, give or take a couple of centuries, finally the Nabta Playa dried up completely. No more water, not even in the wells. Major, major decision to make by the elders. They had to move out and go somewhere else. They were 100 kilometers from the Nile Valley. By that time, the Nile Valley had become a paradise. The horrible marshlands had been washed away by the great floods that formed every time during the monsoon season. In fact, the monsoons that these nomads were dependent on were the cause of the famous yearly Nile flood of the Nile. Same mechanism, same hydraulic mechanism. And Egypt had turned itself into a wonderful valley for running about 1,200 kilometers with lush vegetation, fruits, and wonderful fauna. Still, not much was going on. Few people. The odds are that these nomads, these star people, went to the Nile Valley, more than likely in the region of Aswan, and probably to the island of Elephantine, an island off the city of Aswan, which today is a touristic island. So that's roughly their story. Now, our story. In 1974, an anthropologist called Fred Wendorf, an American, from the Texas Methodist University, who had a concession to explore the Eastern Sahara, was driving with a bunch of students, about 6 of them, with a jeep, was heading to Simba and passed near this Nabta Playa. Had no idea where it was. They stopped for what they called a comfort rest, having a pee. And when they stopped, and there they are, spreading around in the desert to do their needs, they began to notice shards and stones set in very strange positions. They discovered the prehistoric site of the star people. And they published their work, they studied every detail, they even... Now, I won't go to much detail of how it looks like, but basically, it involves what is known as a central complex A, they call it. There's a kind of central place made up of mounds of stones and tumuli. And from this central place radiates about 5 or 6 lines of stones heading east. They're roughly about half a kilometer, stones placed in alignment. And not far off, which was their main interest at first, was a circle of stones with some stones in the center. But they didn't pay much attention until they had an astronomer come in from Boulder, Colorado University, a fellow called Kim Melville. And he immediately said, I think we're looking at megalithic astronomical sites, sort of Egyptian version of Stonehenge. And they quickly realized, or Melville quickly realized, that the stone circle contained a summer solstice alignment and an equinoctial alignment. That immediately fell to any astronomer. It cannot be coincidence. This is an astronomical circle, or a calendar, if you like. And they published their work in '98 in Nature, and it made a huge sensation. They had found what they claimed to be the oldest astronomical megalithic site in the world, predating Stonehenge by at least 1,000 years. Changed the whole picture of archaeoastronomy. What they didn't realize then, it took them a year or two to work it out, although they did mention there could be stellar alignments. Now the big thing is the stellar alignments, because these lines radiating, is this better or is... How do we get it there? Whoa. I can even hear myself. These lines radiating. Oh, no. Yeah. I'll have to take some off time, huh? Just put it on here. No, it won't. Can you hear me now? Is it good? Is it good? Yeah. Okay, these lines radiating, 5 or 6 of them, he felt they could be pointing to rising of stars. And he was not wrong. He wasn't wrong. What's amazing is this. Egyptologists are absolutely unanimous that the ancient Egyptians were aware of 3 major constellations throughout their whole history, from the beginning of their civilization to the very end. We know this from their scriptures, we know this from the alignments of their monuments, and we know this from their so-called astronomical drawings, which you find in tombs in Upper Egypt. These constellations are Orion, which they identified to the god Osiris, Canis Major, which contains the star Sirius, which is partly identified to the goddess Isis and the god Horus, the son of Isis and Horus and Osiris. And the third constellation, a northern constellation, a constellation belonging to what we call the circumpolar constellations, those who rotate around the pole, which you in America call the Big Dipper. We call it the plow. The Egyptians call it the thigh, the bull's thigh. It actually looks more like a thigh than a plow and a dipper. Nonetheless, so these are the 3 constellations that they knew. And the reason that they observed them, which is not very well understood by Egyptologists, is that they worked together. It's a bit like the needles on your watch. They tell the time. And they tell the time that these people were interested in. They tell the time of the beginning of the flood or the beginning of the monsoon. And they tell the time when it ends. And many other things that I won't go in detail, but that's what I want to focus on, because lo and behold, Kim Melville and his gang at the Nabta Playa discovered that these stellar alignments point to these 3 constellations. So now we have the link. We can throw back these ideologies, at least the 4th or 5th millennium BC. We're pushing Egyptian religious thinking a further 3,000 years than we previously thought. A bitter pill for Egyptologists to swallow at this stage. But swallow they will, because we're dealing with facts and figures, with GPS, with Google Earth, with precise alignments, and top astronomers involved in the field. Two in particular, Professor Giulio Malli of Milan University and Professor Archie Roy of Glasgow University, and many others, but they are the leading lights in this field. And I'm working with them. I'm the one who realized that we're looking at a thread. And the way to thread all this up is astronomy. Bad luck for the Egyptologists, because this is very precise. We're talking like arc minutes here. Huh? No BS. You can interpret text the way you like. That's where the problem lies. You interpret text and you say this and I say that. But with astronomy, when you say 28 degrees, it's 28 degrees, and I don't care if you bring me the Archangel Gabriel who says it isn't. I think we found a place where at least the ideology started. But these guys also came physically to the Nile Valley. It's quite amazing that because of a depression in the desert, that the lake gets formed, that people go and settle there, that they watch the sky, they build up some form of method of knowing time, converted in some religious ideologies. 10 minutes, don't worry, I'll do it. And we have the pyramids. We have temples. We have a whole civilization that spawns from a rainfall falling in the desert. So we got one point of reference. What is very odd about this, and I don't know if we have Thomas Brough in the audience, do we? Oh, there he is. Tom, right at the end. Would you stand up, Tom, so people can see you? Tom is among the very few who actually went to Nabta Playa. I'll be going there in a couple of weeks' time. And luckily for us, Tom had the bright idea of making sure that he takes very, very careful measurements of these alignments with satellites, quick bird use, and physically went there. So we have a record of these stones because, unfortunately, there's been some tampering. And we're going there to have a look and see what's been going on. But we have the original maps and we have Tom's measurements, so we're safe. But what Tom discovered is, oddly enough, the same thing happening with the Nabta Playa megaliths, particularly the stone circle, and what happened at Giza. Giza, if you remember, provided 2 dates. And the way that these 2 dates show up is because of the belt of Orion stars, 3 stars, that are changing angles through what we call the precessional cycle. And this conference is supposed to be about precession. So let me tell you what precession is if some of you are not quite clear. And they told me 10 minutes, I'll do it in 35 seconds. You're on a planet, you're on a ball, a huge globe. And every schoolboy and schoolgirl knows that this ball rotates on its axis. Rotates on its axis in 24 hours, which we call a day. And in this, we see the sun and stars appearing to rise and set and so forth. And we know that this ball also revolves around the sun in a cycle of about 365 and a quarter days, which we call the seasons. Well, this planet also wobbles. It wobbles very, very slowly, like a spinning top, in 26,000 years cycle. This is precession. And the effect it has, you don't feel it, you don't see it, it's too slow. But on long periods of time, the position of stars shifts. And the angle that they make. The stars are fixed, of course. It is us who are moving and spinning. But they appear to change position and change angle of the sky. So if you look at Orion's belt, it's at a different altitude today than it was in the time of the pyramids. And the angle it makes with the horizontal is different. And that's how we know these 2 dates at Giza. Orion's belt is giving us a date with a shaft. There's a shaft pointing to Orion's belt. It gives us 2,500 BC. But the 3 pyramids on the ground give us another angle, and that's where we get the 11,500 BC. 2 angles of Orion's belt. And amazingly, if Brophy is right, we have within the solar circle 3 stones that appear to represent Orion's belt, which have, there's 2 sets of 3 stones, and they have different angles, giving 2 dates. How do we suspect that they represent Orion? Is that one of these megalithic lines shooting from the central station points to Orion's belts rising. There can be very little doubt that they focused on Orion. And there are reasons they did so, is because it's rising after a period of invisibility marked the beginning of the monsoon. It was their stars par excellence, of which they trusted their very survival so that they would know when the waters would come. So now we have a weird situation. Giza speaks of an earlier time, probably speaking of its origins at Nabta. That's where we come from, they say. That's where we all started. And yet Nabta seems to say beyond. And that's the unknown. The unknown. We're going to go with Brophy, and hopefully Robert Schock will join us. We need a geologist to look at those stones. And we're going to rock the boat here, big time. Hopefully we all agree that we're looking, there is no question that we're looking at an ancient site. Nabta has been dated to the dates of 4,000, going down to even 7,000 BC. Carbon dating, no doubt. The reason we have these carbon datings, we found many tumuli in the area that contain bones of cattle. That's another weird one. They buried cattle, no human bones. Cattle was sacred. 5 minutes. No worry, I've got a sort of clockwork orange in here. No. Cattle was sacred. Cattle was sacred. Why? Because when they moved from lake to lake, they carried literally their walking larder. Cattle was their survival. Killed the cattle. They drank the milk, they drank the blood by piercing the neck. Like today the Maasai do. Maasai never eat their cattle. Cattle is something you keep because you survive with them, you travel with them. You have a walking fridge. Yeah. That's what you got. They developed this cattle cult with those stars. The stars of Orion, the stars of Sirius. We find this not only throughout Egyptian culture with the so-called cattle cults of Hathor, of Isis, the mother goddess, the sky goddess. They're all cattle. But we find the same stars, the same cult in the temple of Dendera, which is 3,000 years at least away from the Nabta Playa. It's quite amazing. Except that the megalithic stones have become temples. The same ideas, the same alignments, the same stars, 3,000 years later. These people were extraordinary. They maintained ideologies over millennia. We don't know what happened to our civilization if we go down 2,000 years and beyond. These people kept them for 1,000, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 years. I think we got part of the answer. We begin to know where we at least began to come from. I suspect very strongly that what we've always suspected is that our origins are in Central Africa, that we come from there. But we need to know what made us move around, what finally gave us religious ideologies, and why we've lost it. We need to understand all this, because we're moving somewhere where we don't know. We have a civilization in crisis. We don't understand each other anymore. I've got one shoe in the East, the Middle East, and the other in the West. And there's a big confusion.
and we must clear it soon. Time is running out. We're toying around with dangerous situations. And we're all aware of this. We need to think differently. I'll leave you with those thoughts. I haven't shown my slides, but I enjoy doing it verbally. I hope you have too. Thank you very much.